pleasure to be asked to say a few words about Mr. Gotabaya Rajapaksa, whom I first met when I returned to Sri Lanka to be the Secretary General of the Peace Secretariat. Mr. Rajapaksa was the Defense Secretary. I recall that one of my first experiences after returning was experiencing the bombing that injured Mr. Rajapaksa. We tend to forget that people like him made enormous sacrifices, gave up comfortable lifestyles elsewhere, and returned to the country because the country needed them at that time. We all know that he has some personal characteristics which endears him to a lot of people. He's straightforward, doesn't mince his words, he speaks his mind. He is also a vegetarian and I believe a teetotaler as well. He's also a very gentle person. In my experience, he has been extremely sensitive to the needs of his men, people who work for him, and also in general. There have been occasions when we raised certain issues with him regarding civilians, and he responded very positively, even though previously he had been advised by his security establishment to take certain courses of action. He modified this because the civilians around him, people like me, would raise issues and say that certain acts may not be in the best interests of the country and the civilian population. There were times when he took decisions which were very significant from the perspective of the country as well as the conduct of the military campaign. I recall that it was his decision to designate the campaign against terrorist LTT as a humanitarian operation. Basically, there was an important element to this humanitarian operation, which was that the civilians were going to be identified and separated from the combatants of the LTTE. I believe that because of this effort on his part and on the part of the government to distinguish the terrorists from the civilians, many more people are alive today. Many more civilians were saved from the ravages of the conflict. You will recall that when the trapped civilians, the civilians who were held as a hostage shield, started streaming out of the Mullaitivu Lagoon, it was his decision to deploy the military to rescue them. Soldiers dropped their guns and carried children, old men and women to safety, despite the fact that they were being shot at by the LTTE, which was still holed up on the other side of the lagoon. Taking decisions like this, which resulted in more casualties for the military than originally envisaged, I believe showed that he was a man whose sensitivities need to be admired. For him, the civilians were very important and a crucial element of this entire campaign. When it came to dealing with civilians, the fact that Gotabaya Rajapaksa was planning the approaches to the last holdouts of the LTTE meant that many civilians survived the ravages of this very unfortunate terrorist conflict. Of course, Mr. Rajapaksa did not interfere with the conduct of the foreign relations of the country, but there were times when they overlapped. There were times when Western leaders had come to Sri Lanka expecting to influence the decision makers here. I can recall David Miliband, Kushner, etc. coming here demanding that the thrust against the LTTE be halted. The excuse was, of course, the possibility of civilian casualties. But now we believe in retrospect, and having had the benefit of reading the WikiLeaks cables that had been exchanged at the time, we know that the goal was to extricate the LTTE leadership from their last holdout. And distinctly remember both Kushner and Miliband being told that Sri Lanka's policies are determined by the Sri Lankans and by the Sri Lankan population. We were no longer a colony, and we did not need to be told what is right and what is wrong by our former colonial masters. I also recall that whenever he went to Los Angeles, where he had spent a number of years earlier, he would participate in the social activities of the Sri Lankan community, whether they were birthday parties or events organized by old boys and old girls of Columbus School. He had no hesitation participating in these events, wearing casual clothes and mixing with the others who were there. That was Gotabaya Rajapaksa, and he convinced his military, the leadership of the military, that the LTTE could be defeated. They planned carefully, they thought about every aspect meticulously, they developed new strategies and tactics. They learned from the experiences of armies elsewhere and from history, and succeeded beyond all measure